Good morning, vinyl community. I'm here to read a chapter called Making a Killing, Sadie's Story and the Schiller Scam. Told in the words of a pretty one-year-old who calmly confessed to the most hideous crimes of the century, from the career of killing of Sharon Tate. What's been lost in the confusion surrounding the Manson phenomenon is how decisive a role of extravagant stories Susan Atkins, we are told that she sequeled in jail in early November of '69, really played on the entire future development of the case and the legend it inspired. If the Manson myth has a mother, it's Sexy Sadie. Without her original confession, Biolsi would have had no case, as he later admitted, and because his tale was sanctioned by the docile, unquestioning media within weeks of her indictment as the true story, almost all of the stories spun from it, including tall tales told by her fellow defendants, Watson, Kasabian, and Krenwinkel, were obliged to more or less stick to the general outline of the Atkins account. Of course, to paraphrase the Beatles she so adored, Atkins' narrative was polished with more than a little help from her friends. Its lawyers can be considered friends. The Manson's myth formulation began when Atkins, identifying herself as Donna Powell, was picked up by police at Barker Ranch on October 9, 1969, with her infant child, Zizo Zadfrak. Originally, Atkins was suspected of having some trouble involvement with auto theft. On October 12th, the day of Manson's arrest, young Kitty Lutzinger, Bobby Beausoleil's pregnant girlfriend, was discovered by the police not far from the Barker Ranch. She requested law enforcement protection, claiming that she was in danger from others in the nomadic tribe she'd been staying with. Lutzinger never really fully trusted Manson by the Manson Circle, agreed to talk to detectives about her knowledge of other crimes committed by the hippie car thieves being rounded up in the area. Two of the Los Angeles homicide detectives investigating the Hinman murder since July have been looking for Lutzinger ever since they learned of her relationship with Beausoleil. When they heard that she'd surfaced, she came to interview her in the small desert town of Independence in Inyo County. In the course of telling the cops that she'd heard from others about the Hinman murder, she since discredited tale, placing all blame for Beausoleil's deed on Manson. Kitty never mentioned that Susan Atkins had been present at the crime scene during the killing. Lutzinger, it would be recalled, had personal reasons to shift blame from Beausoleil to Manson since she was primarily Beausoleil's girlfriend. Well, when I met Bobby, she was Linda, she was Bobby was, they had them all, yeah. The next day, Atkins, held in the small Independence jail, was questioned. She admitted that she knew that when Bobby stabbed her friend Hinman, she was arrested for murder and sent to Sybil Brand Women's Detention Institution in LA. While all this was going on, police were questioning the still unindicted Leslie Van Houten, who, that's what I was trying to think of her name. That was Bobby's girlfriend when I met him. The unindicted Leslie Van Houten, who had also had in their custody about a tip that she revealed her own knowledge about the Stella Waverly murders to some others. In the course of the first questioning, Leslie said without any ambiguity that Charlie wasn't in the house. The statement was made more the Atkins confession and the bizarre defense strategy arising from that to ensure that the Manson myth, Van Houten, whose links to the Manson Circle was never really deep and also primarily one of Bobby's harems, came to very close to testifying against his accomplishments in exchange for immunity. It appears that Van Houten was leaning into the direction of telling something more than in the line of the truth about the crimes that Charlie had masterminded, story Atkins and her lawyers soon concocted. In fact, Van Houten, despite her seemingly loyalist to Manson and the other defendants in court, wavered back and forth even well into the trial. She was on the verge of cooperating with the prosecution immediately before the death of her attorney, Ronald Hughes, who you'll recall died under mysterious circumstances in Death Valley, was like drowned or something. which made her think better of it. The conspiracy to cover up the real background of the crimes was extremely fragile. It is in danger of being expressed until the very moment the verdicts were delivered in the courtroom. Had there been Van Houten rather than Atkins, who broke the trial in November 69, it's unlikely then that the cover story of Manson ordering Helter Skelter could have been devised. But while Lulu vacillated, human nature prevailed. Sadie Mae Glutz seized the first opportunity to save her own skin that she could find. What happened next can be interpreted, if you like, as an indestructible chain of consequences, but only if you're endowed with the extraordinary amount of faith in the essential goodness of mankind and the ethers and the ethics of the legal profession and a complete ignorance of the influence organized crime had always executed on the U.S. justice system. If Atkins was found guilty of involvement in the Hinman's killing, she faced the death penalty according to the California law of conspiracy. She was destitute and had no family to help her with legal costs. As yet, through some other unknown connection that remains obscure to this day, her court-appointed attorney, Gerald Condon, was dismissed from the case, and the dirt-poor, sexy Sadie immediately obtained the public defender services of Ronald Caballero, a high-priced attorney with some very intriguing connections. He promised Atkins that if she cooperated, she could make a deal with the prosecutor that would run with her reduced sentence. For while Caballero was the public face of Atkins' original defense team, a much more experienced and better-known attorney was the real brains behind the legal strategy. Caballero's associate was Paul Caruso, one of the most expensive and prominent lawyers in California. Why would someone of Caruso's stature become involved as a public defender in the unknown hippie Atkins, who couldn't have even dreamed of paying him his usual exorbitant rate? As you'll recall from the last chapter, Caruso was not only renowned for his unstinting service to an Italian-American community, but also for his proven competence at defending some of what groups shadier underworld business partners, especially clients in the narcotics trade. We need only refer to four of the defendants he served in 1969, alone to how remarkable it is that Paul Caruso should happen to be one of the attorneys helping with Susan Atkins, defense attorney, supposedly before her assault with the Tate murders was known. To refresh your memory, among Caruso's other clients in the same dope-dealing demi-monde which Atkins and her accomplices moved in on was Tommy Harrigan. The drug dealer Harrigan, we will recall, had visited Sebring and Fatowsky at Cielo Drive on the day before their murders to arrange for an MDA delivery. It was Harrigan who heard Fatowsky claim that he would die young and violently. Harrison is detailed in Chapter 5 as part of the Billy Doyle dope-dealing clique and the frequently guest at the same Mama Cass drug parties at Woodstock Road, what Susan Atkins and Tex Watson attended. Also involved in the small world of the Doyle Harrigan Reinhardt Dawson drug circle was the major cocaine dealer named Tex Tackott. Among with Billy Doyle, Tackott's name appeared in the Los Angeles Times as a Cielo Drive murder suspect immediately after the story broke. When Charles Tackott lost a potential job with NBC because they didn't want to be associated with a murder suspect, Tackott called Paul Caruso as his lawyer. Caruso filed a lawsuit against the Los Angeles Times, accusing the paper of dismantling his drug dealer's client's reputation by connecting him to the Cielo Drive murder. As it's in with regard that Caruso's name comes up in the connection with Cielo Drive as at an early point in the investigation. Tate homicide investigators, Lieutenant Earl Deemer, served Tackott's friend and fellow suspect Billy Reinhardt at Parker Center in 30 September 69. Reinhardt made it clear that he knew Paul Caruso well. Reinhardt found it in particular that Caruso, a Los Angeles Times legal representative, was suing the paper he worked for on behalf of Tackott when he mentioned it several times in December. Charles Tackott is suing the Los Angeles Times. Caruso told me one of his clients that Charles turned in everybody's name as Cielo Drive murder suspects, which made this guy go to Charles and present on him and say, I'm going to do you in because you turned in all of our friends' names. And and it seems kind of weird that Paul Caruso is the attorney for the Los Angeles Times too. In the event of an interview, Reinhardt says, now Charles has a suit against the Los Angeles Times and Caruso is the lawyer of the Los Angeles Times, And what I mean, a lot of the weird things like I have come down that I don't understand really. The lawyer's role in the episode is indeed kind of weird, especially when we consider that the 3 months later, Caruso would broker the kind of phony Atkins confession as the executive to the closest of the Helter Skelter Times, the Los Angeles Times, that the killing of Sharon Tate, the book made from those articles, was published by New York American Library, a subsidiary of the Los Angeles Times. During the September 1969 interview, Bill Reinhardt also told Deemer that Caruso was well versed in details of the Cielo Drive crime scene that the police had not yet released. This is from Caruso that they had already found fingerprints and footprints at the murder site and that the gun was a small caliber gun. Susan Atkins had not even arrested yet at this juncture. Why, a month after the murders, did her future lawyer have an interest in the outside knowledge of the crimes his future client would be charged with? Again, it must be emphasized that the lawyer helping to prepare Atkins' defense was not only directly involved with at least two of the original Cielo Drive suspects and the newspaper most responsible for providing the public with false information on the crime. Among the many mob clients Caruso represented was Eugenio Massaro, whose sidekick Joel Rostow's presence at Cielo Drive right before the murders was, of course, one of the main factors the cover-up sought to conceal. The list of clients is incriminating enough, but when we consider that Atkins' original statement, the first tentative trickle of the flood of bullshit that would soon become Bugliosi's helter-skelter, was made while that was being represented by Paul Caruso, it becomes almost impossible to believe that the placement of her defense team is just an amazing manifest of chance. Richard Caballero was the first public face of her original defense team, but Caruso's well-documented presence at several of the Caballero-Atkins conferences made it clear that the better-connected attorney for the mob consistently provoked counsel on her case. This was the same strategy old friend Sidney Korshak utilized when guiding the legal strategy of his own underworld clients. Korshak discreetly discredited the defense of his crook clients from behind the scenes, allowing attorneys less openly connected to the mob to be the front man in his operations. Consider what we know of the jet-lagged Polanski-Gutowski-Evans damage control meeting with the fixer Korshak at Paramount Studios. Someday, Paramount Studios, day after the Cielo Drive murders, it's not hard to fetch to suspect that, like of Russian Marty Walk's doll, many layers of nested dolls of diminished size placed within another, just as Caruso stood behind Caballero, so did Korshak stand behind Caruso. We will probably never know which higher up in the mob Hollywood drug dealers' chain of command decided that Atkins should be given the order to confess by telling the story which conveniently detected all of the details the mafia wanted to keep from public scrutiny. Many years later, Atkins only spoke vaguely of being given a tip shortly after arriving in Los Angeles from Death Valley. The words was that cops knew she was involved in the Cielo Drive slaughter. If she wanted a deal to avoid the gas chamber, as this yet unidentified advisor assisted her, something could be arranged. The mob defense attorney systems of buffers and cutouts is designed to prevent such knowledge from becoming known as is prevalent. In the vulnerable legal situations Atkins was in, little permission would have been needed to convince her that this was an offer that she couldn't refuse. Of all of Caruso's many top-tier mob clients, it is obviously Joel Rostow had been the most to lose if the true events of Cielo Drive came out. When Rostow was freed on bail after being shot during the failed Watson dope robbery of April 1969, he relied on Caruso's legal services to keep him out of court. When the police interviewed Rostow about Charles McCaffrey's claim that her former boyfriend had dropped off a major drug delivery at Cielo Drive hours before the murders, Caruso gave him advice on how to answer any future questions. It's possible that Caruso knew about Watson's drug burglary MO 7 months before he miraculously ended up on Sexy Sadie's legal team. Then Rostel publicly represented Rostel's partner in crime, Gino Massaro, in 1969, and his very Cielo-like drug-related home invasion charges added even more suspicion to Caruso's defense of Atkins. Gerard Catania, the head of the Genovese family, who was the Boyardos and Joel Rostel's ultimate answer to, had already mounted his own private investigation into the death of Sebring and the LaBiancas. Catania wanted to know who was killing off his West Coast connections, and he was more than a little curious about the huge amount of drugs that had been stolen from his LA distributors. The Genovese family was maintained 1,000 eyes and ears throughout the federal prison system, including a few law enforcement officials in the mob's payroll. In many ways, the syndicate's intelligence operation was more effective than anything the police could arrange. So it isn't all that unlikely that all the jailhouse whispers about Atkins' involvement in the Tate LaBianca murders could have reached the Genovese family before they were related to the authorities. Whatever prompted her to squeal, by early November '69, Sexy Sadie began to prowl the halls of Sybil Rand Institute, eager to tell her gory tales of anyone who would listen. Knowing Manson as well as Atkins did, she certainly had to have dimmed into that the wages of snitching on her crime partners indeed was death. So that was Atkins up to after all the incautious talk of the Tate murders. By hoping that someone would do the dirty work of informing the police of her knowledge of what occurred at Cielo, Atkins was trying to snitch without being held accountable for snitching. Atkins' supposedly spontaneous confession has every appearance of having been a convicted subterfuge. According to convicted parole protocol, only offer direct testimony of the authorities counts as a kind of snitching that gets you a knife in the stomach when you aren't paying attention. If Sadie admitted her prosecution of the Cielo Drive crimes by telling a fellow prisoner about its supposed confidence, and that the prisoner in turn betrays her by going to the cops, Sadie couldn't technically be considered a turncoat. Furthermore, presenting her tale to the form of enthusiastic, bloodthirsty bragging rather than remorseful squealing, I think it was manipulation. Atkins hoped to suggest to a later jury that she was mentally ill. Her legal strategy came from what was put on as a crazy act, something she repeatedly said Charlie advised her to do if she ended up in jail. Atkins' willingness to blame Manson for the crimes immediately after her arrest would in itself seem to disapprove the popular myth tenet that she was once one of his most avoided and loyal disciples. It's somehow this clear-cut contradiction is overlooked in all the standard literature of the case. The story she was told was very vague in motive and decidedly didn't include a word about I went along with Tex to steal thousands of dollars worth of cocaine, mescaline, and MSD and acid, nor did her story mention anything like the helter-skelter motive. It's important detail that was only added much later, more legal crooks added to the brew. One of the convicts who are sold Atkins supposedly confessed into the jail was a convicted prostitute named Ronnie Howard, a.k.a. Veronica Hughes. Although her main career was in whoring and larceny, it was forging a prescription that brought Howard into Sybil Brand with Atkins. Atkins' was lesbian lust earned her otherwise jailhouse nickname, the fastest tongue in the West. Seduced Ronnie Howard and supposedly revealed her gossipy story during post-Cornelius pillow talk. Ronnie Howard has since died, murdered in 1975, and yet another of the early mysterious deaths that cut about the lives of so many enmeshed in this mystery, making it impossible to confirm her exact role in the crucial turning moment in Manson's life. But I was able to speak with the other woman Atkins contrived to confide in, Howard's longtime friend, Virginia Graham, a.k.a. whatever. In fact, also Howard's received much of the publicity for breaking the case. It was actually Graham to whom Atkins first told the tale. If Graham's hunch about her longtime friend and is correct, then Howard was largely repeatedly hearsay about what Graham told her. The relative connections Atkins' attorney Caruso had to such Cielo Drive drug dealing visitors as Rostow, Harrigan, Doyle, and Reinhardt are more than enough to suggest that Atkins' confession was calculated legal strategy meant to conceal any sign of mob drug dealing at Cielo Drive. The coincidental connections Graham revealed to the concerning her pretrial friendship with the boast of dramatic persona relevant to Cielo Drive, including the murder house itself, speak for themselves. Understandably, these concoctions were not revealed in court when Graham testified. Virginia Graham's willingness to inform law enforcement about Atkins, what told her the most significant factors leading to Manson indictment for murder and her later conviction, despite her crucial role Graham placed in Manson's destiny, has only been referred to in passing as the standard literature in this case. But her part in relaying the tale that forms the kernel of the Manson myth deserves a more thorough analysis that has previously been presented. Graham was in her late 30s when she resulted of her meeting with Susan Atkins and Sybil Rand brought her into public attention. But by early November of 69, as we will see, she could already boast of a colorful life in the company of some of the most powerful figures in the entertainment industry and politics. During her conversation, Graham was adamant in insisting that despite the fact that she once authored a book entitled The Joy of Hooking, the frequently printed allegation that she was a prostitute was false. I would like to straighten one thing out, she told me. I was not a professional call girl, and that has disturbed me for a long time. I was, if you want to call it, in the Hollywood scene, so to speak, and I used to get together and have a lot of parties, and I know a lot of celebrities, and basically that was it. But I never really went out on any call for any sum of money. This, in my opinion, was a plan put in Susan Atkins' cell to coerce her. Now, I want to make this clear, Graham continued. When I put together a lot of these parties, the guests were some very influential political. Sounds like Jelaine. So let's just say that people I got called from Mexico, I had a relationship, very short one now, with Miguel Alemando, the president of Mexico. And you think this lady don't think this lady's a plan when she's organizing the heads of countries? According to Graham, Aleman's representative world called her to alert her to arrange parties to dignitaries, including the owner of the influential Mexican newspaper La Reforma, and they paid for that, and that's how I got the title of call girl. So be it. It was in the capacity of arranging these parties for prominent men that she first met Ronnie Howard at the famous hooker hangout, the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills Hotel. She said that Howard would be a welcome guest at her parties because of her attractiveness at the time. Graham's house duty, she told me, consisted of introducing her to well-to-do gentlemen with very pretty ladies and certainly to Jolie Gabor, but I did much this same thing. Gabor, the Hungarian-born mother of actress Eva and Jaja Gabor, was famed for Hollywood matchmaking of young female beauties and male movie industry players. Graham went on to tell me I was known as a very good connection, okay? And when I used the term connection, I knew a lot of people and a lot of starlets, and I won't name those. They are because some of them are quite famous now and want to come to these parties, and that's how I know Ronnie. What some of these girls did when they talked out of my house, it was never an understanding thing, any of the gentlemen, that they were kept to sleep with these girls, okay? So when they did, they got out of my house, and I truly didn't know I wasn't there. I made the connections. We had Dom Perignon, and we used to be my favorite, and I had a big house with a tennis court and a pool. These girls ended up as starlets, and they were very common in Hollywood at that time. Graham's party house at 9440 Cherokee Lane, as it was said to be, sounds like the early 60s version of the swinging scene that would get wilder and druggier at J. Sebring's Easton Drive Manor at Cielo Drive. With the most With not entirely surprising, Graham was told me that she and her ex-husband, a sometimes pimp on the fringes of show business who had married call girl Ronnie Howard, but actually been given a tour of 10050 Cielo Drive by a real estate agent when the couple were already separated, was considering leasing the house in the early 60s. Graham and her husband ultimately chose another more appropriate property on Benedict Canyon, but she recalled layout very well when she heard Atkins' account of the murders. So Susan's telling Graham the account of the murders in prison, but Graham already knows the account of the house. How could that be? Yeah, she's no honeypot or anything. So we're going to end it right here. This is going to go on about the Bolero family and the mob and all kinds of things. We're just going to end it right here. I'm going to say that I think that Susan Atkins was set up. She's the only person I met on the ranch who wasn't a federal agent, and that's a fact, Jack. So pray for all the friends and family. We'll continue reading tomorrow. Hopefully, if you enjoy my stream at all, you will like and subscribe. And God bless the members of the vinyl community, the crime community, and all the children. Have a nice day.